So I wonder, Monique, if we could define some terms for our audience, because let's talk about one term, for example, racism. We have kind of our historical understanding of racism, maybe the way you and I grew up. I mean, I was living in South Orange County when Reginald Denny was pulled out of the truck, and we had the whole thing with Rodney King go down and the LA riots. It was horrific. Um, uh, how are we to understand racism? Because I think you're right. It's kind of like, it feels like talking to a Mormon as a Christian. We're using the same terms like, hey, we're saved by grace. But really, a Mormon believes, you're initially saved by grace, but then you got to go preserve your salvation. So we got to define the term. What do we mean by racism?
Well, I want to go back to something you said just a minute ago. One of the things that I think is important within, especially like this whole idea of, people of color are just being plucked off by cops and cops are just trigger happy and all of those things. One of the things that I think we have to first remember is that scripture calls us, before making judgment, to have evidence. Who are the witnesses? But yet what we're finding in culture is that, to me, on either side, we jump to these conclusions. Well, he must be innocent because he has the badge, or he must be guilty because he resisted arrest, or, whatever. It's like, we have to breathe. And this is part of what I believe scripture calls us to, is before we make judgments, before we pronounce innocence or guilt, provide the evidence, provide the witnesses. And it's not just like, oh, I got my one witness, or things like that. But no, what are all of the pieces of evidence? Who are the witnesses? And I know that some people will say, well, you're just, not wanting to see the truth and all of those things. But actually, it's not that I'm not wanting to see the truth. I actually welcome the truth. I want to know what happened. I just want to do so in a biblical way.
Yeah,
so there's that.
Exactly. Yeah, because
Now,
it's like when he gets shot, like I would feel like when he gets shot 7 times, okay, like that's the part I go, look, could there, like, let's look at the evidence right now. It's starting to show that maybe he had a knife in the car or what have you. But I'm going, nevertheless, the cops didn't know that at the moment. Could they have tased? Could they have wrestled? Did they have to shoot 7 times? Right. So that's where I go. So here I am. I'm a conservative, but I'm wanting to acknowledge that, that's really unfortunate. But I think sometimes what happens is you watch the left side of things and you don't hear about black on black crimes. And that can be distraught, because it's like, okay, Black Lives Matters, but it seems like that focuses on what cops are doing to Black lives. And so this is where injustice gets kind of mixed up. Like, what justice? Whose justice? Which justice?
Yes. Regarding definitions of racism, I think at one point in our history, we saw racism being, this individual act. Like, I am a part of a racist organization, the KKK or something like that. People would know that I am racist because of the words that I use, or because of, if it was today, things that I post on Facebook or things like that. But it was me. I was the racist. It wasn't seen as like this entire structure. The entire American structure is now a part of whiteness. And
racism.
I'm sorry?
Systemic racism now.
Systemic racism. But we get that idea because the definition of racism is no longer just individual acts, but it's prejudice plus power. So it's having this racist attitude or participating in power structures that produce or promote racism or whiteness. And so, and also things that produce inequities. So because you are a white male, you participate in power structures much differently than I could as a Black female. And so with that in mind, I then would become the oppressed. You would have more power than I do, and you can use your power differently than I can use mine.